I was talking earlier this week about the Chicago International Film Festival. They're showing a documentary about Adam Kinzinger called The Last Republican. Well, there's another documentary that is playing at the Chicago International Film Festival Saturday, October 26th at 2:30, Sunday, October 27th at 2 p.m. at the AMC New City Theater. You will be getting a chance to see the 2024 documentary Zurowski versus Texas. Listen to the trailer here.
Good morning, Your Honor. Molly Duane from the Center for Reproductive Rights for the Plaintiffs. While Texas's abortion bans ostensibly have a medical exception, that medical exception simply does not function in practice. This is not hypothetical. It is borne out by the real experiences of women and their doctors, 15 of whom are plaintiffs in this case.
Okay?
Yeah, I'm super trying not to cry right now.
The testimony you will hear over the next 2 days will demonstrate that the chilling of necessary medical care is real and ongoing. You will hear testimony from Amanda Zurowski, whose water broke prematurely and who became septic, waiting to be eligible for an abortion.
I'm going to write a W on my hand for Willa. She's always there. All right, let's do this.
You will hear how Samantha Cassiano was forced to suffer the trauma of carrying a non-viable pregnancy to term, and then watched her daughter gasp for air for the 4 short hours of her life. You will also hear from Austin Denard, who is an OBGYN herself, and who was forced to travel out of state for an abortion after her baby was diagnosed with a fatal condition. By any measure, Texas is in a healthcare crisis. The only issue in this case, however, is who should be getting abortions under the medical exception to the state's abortion bans. And 2 years later, still, no one knows. That is the bare minimum that plaintiffs are entitled to under the law. Thank you, Your Honor.
Abbie Perrault co-directed this documentary with Maisie Crow, and Abbie is here now to talk to us about this. Abbie, I'm surprised. First of all, welcome. I'm so glad to talk to you about this. This is what happened in Texas is so amazing. But it happened recently. How did you do this documentary so quickly?
Hi, Joan. Well, first, thank you for having me on to talk about the film. We moved very quickly with this film, and we did it by filming. My co-director and I split up. We covered so much ground in so little time, and what was important to us was getting these stories out as soon as possible because we both come from Texas, and when we saw what was actually happening on the ground to women and their families, we knew it was so important for audiences across the country to see what happens when abortion bans are put into practice.
We talked on this program about a couple of the cases in Texas, particularly the woman who was part of the lawsuit who actually left the state to get the care she needed. And it was, at the time, there was a sound clip released from her, and she said, you know, my husband and I were worried, you know, will we be, is anybody tracking us? Will we be allowed to get on a plane? Should we drive? But what happens if something, you know, it's going to be a long drive. What happens to me if something happens during the drive? I mean, it's like this dystopian world. Tell me, pick one of the women you've featured and tell us her story, if you would.
Sure. Yeah, I think overall what's happened is there's a culture of fear in Texas, and it's paralyzing women and families from knowing what they're able to do, even in a medical emergency. And so I'll tell you about Amanda Zurowski. She is the lead plaintiff in this case, and at 18 weeks, her water broke prematurely, and from there she was told her daughter would most certainly pass away. And so, you know, with abortion not available in Texas, you would think she would leave the state and travel out of state to get the care she needed, but doctors told her that if she left, she could go septic while on a flight or while driving across the state, and so she couldn't be more than 15 minutes from a hospital. However, doctors in Texas could not provide the care she needed. They felt their hands were tied by these harsh restrictions, and so she just had to wait and get sicker and sicker for days until she went septic and ended up in the hospital.
So insane. It is just so so insane how doctors who know better and know that this is a patient who's going to need treatment, they know this patient is going to get sicker and sicker. And for some women, and I don't know if it happened in this case, you let somebody get that septic, and even if you are able to treat them and save their life, some women are never fertile again after this. I mean, it's just unbelievable cruelty, it seems to me.
Yeah, and Amanda was fortunate to even survive this. That's how bad it got. But she also did lose the ability to have children. That is one of the costs that came from this experience. And so the way that it's impacting families, not just immediately, but in the long term, is devastating in Texas.
And you follow these women who brought a case before the Texas Supreme Court saying that they should have been part of what few exceptions are written into the law now. Talk about the court case and how that went.
Sure. So the women were able to testify. They were the first women to take the stand to testify about their own experience on behalf of abortion rights since the 1970s. And so they were so brave in putting their faces and names out in public in this way. And then as they went through the courts, the Attorney General's office continued to just appeal the decisions that were made in their favor all the way up until they ended up at the Texas Supreme Court.
And is that Ken Paxton we're talking about?
That is, yes.
A thoroughly reprehensible human being. But what happened when it got to the Supreme Court?
You know, the Supreme Court essentially came back to them and said that they felt that the laws were clear enough, despite doctors in practice being unable to act. And the reason doctors are so scared is because there's a threat of 99 years in prison, loss of your medical license, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines if you make a call that is later decided to be the wrong call.
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen in this next election in Texas? I mean, Texas tends to be very, well, it's sort of its own separate mental entity. I was going to say it's red. I mean, it does tend to skew conservative, but people from Texas like to think of themselves as independent thinkers. This court case, I followed it, and when the Supreme Court made the ruling, you were really treated fairly. Okay, you lost your fertility, this happened, that happened, but no, it was okay. It was the way things were supposed to be. I just can't imagine the women of Texas just saying, "Oh, okay, well, that's, I guess, just how we're going to live now." What do you think is going to happen?
You know, I wish I could predict the future, but what I know is that even when the courts came back to these women and gave them such a devastating blow, all of them in our film, you see this, have stepped up and said, "I'm not through. I am continuing to fight on this on whatever front possible." And that's the hope in this. And that's, to know that there are women that are continuing to fight gives me hope. But also, I will say that this is not an isolated issue just in Texas. 25 million women are living under abortion restrictions like this in the United States. And I think what you understand in the film is that not only are these women at risk of experiencing something under these laws, but so are their partners and their children and their extended families. The repercussions just reverberate.
Mm-hmm. Yes, throughout their entire ecosystem. And you probably saw this. There was a stat that came out. I can't remember if it came out last night or this morning. Somebody was saying that in the states where there are severe abortion restrictions, the statistics show that there are hundreds, literally hundreds of pregnancies resulting from rape in those states on a daily basis. And
sure. As of January of this year, 65,000 women in America have been forced to carry their rapist children to term.
What do you think? I've talked about what is behind all these moves in the state legislature. Okay, we had the Republican Party that needed a hot-button issue to get their voters angry and to come out at the polls. We have those people who are very, very religious, whose religions tell them that, life begins as soon as two cells come together. But that's still not everybody. When people see how this is playing out, the young woman who died awaiting care, the women who are losing their fertility, the casual cruelty of this all, I just find it hard to believe that the states that now have these abortion bans, that the people who live in those states are going to say, well, that's okay. That's okay. We can live with this. What's your sense of this?
I think that is what I hope people see when they come see this film, is that as soon as you get to know these women on a personal level and live this through their eyes, it completely breaks the paradigm. This is about health care. This is about people being denied basic health care. And when you see it from these women's perspectives, it becomes so clear just how harmful it is. And I think it gives people a new perspective on getting out of the ruts of the arguments that have gone on in this country about this issue.
And there's also hypocrisy involved in the anti-abortion movement. I mean, Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson, I'm pro-life, I'm anti-abortion. Well, I paid for one for my wife, but, that was different. It's always different when it's, God forbid their daughter gets raped and gets pregnant or something horrible happens. That's a different situation. And there's a big class difference here. Even back in the bad old days when abortion was illegal, if you were wealthy, if you were connected, especially if you were all those things and white, there was always a place you could go for a safe abortion. It's just the rest of women who were unable to get that kind of safe care. We've got to take, we're talking too much. No, you're not talking too much, Abbie. I'm talking too much. We've got to take a break. We're going to be back with Abbie Perrault, who co-directed with Maisie Crow a documentary called Zurowski versus Texas, which you can see this Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon as part of the Chicago International Film Festival at the AMC New City Theater. We're going to be back with more after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
The Hal Sparks radio program.
Ladies and gentlemen, Clarence Thomas has been getting these free trips, some of them at the cost of $500,000. He was a guest of a man named Harlan Crow. Sounds like quite frankly, a plantation owner. Colonel Harlan Crow of the Mississippi Crows. Simmer down, they're making too much noise, darling. We can't enjoy our mint juleps.
Hal Sparks, Saturdays from 11 to 1 on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
This is Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
There's a documentary called Zurowski versus Texas, which is being shown twice as part of the Chicago International Film Festival. You can catch it Saturday at 2:30 or Sunday at 2 o'clock. Both showings at the AMC New City Theater. I'm talking with one of the two directors of that documentary, Abbie Perrault. And one of the stories she tells in this is the story of a woman who had no choice in Texas but to carry a fetus to term, even though everyone knew that the fetus would not survive. And indeed, she had to watch her child gasp for breath in the small amount of time that it was alive after she gave birth. I shared with you last week Sally Field, the actress, telling her story of before abortion was legal, being taken to a back alley abortionist when she was 17, being taken there by her family doctor who put his whole career at risk to take her to get this procedure, and just how horrible and how painful and how awful the entire experience was. She's not the only famous person who has told a story, the likes of which we are likely to start hearing again if we don't get these anti-abortion measures repealed or overruled by federal law. There was a clip that was circulating recently. Debbie Reynolds, Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia's mom, Debbie Reynolds was on the talk show that Joan Rivers had for a while. And again, this was long ago when, of course, abortion was not talked about and was very illegal. And Debbie Reynolds told a story that, much like the story you are hearing from these women in this documentary about what carrying a dead fetus was like. I want you to listen to Debbie Reynolds quickly tell her story.
My story is about all women, and we do have our little problems in areas of marriage and losing children. And when I was married to Harry Carl, I was pregnant. I became pregnant. I wanted to have 4 children, so I had Carrie and Todd, and I wanted to have 2 other children. And I got pregnant. I was very lucky in that sense right away. And I was pregnant 7 months, and the baby died inside of me. This happens to a lot of ladies now that I know of what happened to me. And actually, I was 7.5 months pregnant, but I didn't know it. You know, it just sort of shrunk down a little bit, and it was a very hard thing to get over because in those days there were no abortions allowed, whether you were ill or whether you were raped or whether the child died, which is disgusting to think that there is those laws. That is ridiculous. So. When it's a woman's life, you know, and so I had to carry the child full term. Knowing it was dead. That was the law. It didn't matter. It had to abort itself. It could not be taken from me. It's insane to think that really could be.
And you said you would go to parties and people would say to you,
"How's the baby? What name are you going to name the baby?"
Oh, it just broke me.
It just.
And here we are again, Abbie. It's hard to believe. I mean, Debbie Reynolds was telling that story about the bad old days when abortion was illegal. And we're right back there, aren't we, Abbie?
We are. I think there's so many parallels between what Debbie talks about and what Samantha in our film goes through. You know, both of them, it's a very wanted child. This is about people wanting to build their families and then being denied the care that they need when it's already a devastating situation. And so, you know, Debbie talks about having to continue to carry this pregnancy and to be asked about it. And it's actually something Samantha experienced as well, where she had to continue to go into work and people, you know, wanted to ask her about her pregnancy, when she was due, what she was naming the baby. And it's something that, how do you explain over and over that your child is not going to survive, and to be forced to carry on that way? It's shocking to see, and it's something that comes across in our film.
You said that one of the women that you profiled said, "We will not be silenced. This isn't over." What are the next steps? What are women doing, especially in Texas, where this was all, you know, where this all took place?
Yeah, well, this case was fought by the Center for Reproductive Rights, and they're continuing to work in Texas and in states like Texas to file cases wherever possible to push back on these laws. And then these women are continuing to speak about their experiences, because one of the most powerful things you can do is share your story. And so by sharing your story, you're able to have people connect with what's really going on in the country and reckon with it and decide for themselves whether they want to live in a world that allows this to happen.
Yeah. I know for a while there was a campaign called You Know Me, because the argument was, you know, some people were, well, I don't know anybody who's ever had an abortion. And because it's not something women talk about. And frankly, you know, I don't talk about I got a couple of years ago, I got a crown from my dentist. I don't talk about that either. That's my personal stuff. Women shouldn't have to, you know, talk about these procedures to make other people understand that it's health care.
Well, and 1 in 4 women in the U.S. will have an abortion in their lifetime. And so it is very common just because it's not discussed or disclosed doesn't mean that it's not happening. And to know that it's now being denied, particularly even in these situations where it's a medical emergency, it needs to be talked about.
Yeah, it absolutely needs to be talked about. And I remember when Chrissy Teigen lost a child she was carrying. It was at least second trimester. And she said, when these abortion laws started being passed, she was talking to her husband, John, the singer John Legend, and she was like, oh, this is so terrible. And she said, John looked at her and said, well, you had an abortion, right? And she was like, I did? Well, I know that I had a non-viable fetus and that, and she was like, and he was like, yeah, that you had an abortion. And it was such a part of the healthcare system treating her for a pregnancy gone very wrong that she didn't even think of it that way. It was just, I have these problems and the doctors are going to fix them. And wouldn't it be great, Abbie, if we could get back to that?
Absolutely. I think some people want to define abortion very narrowly, but medically it has a clear definition and it covers a wide variety of experiences. And so it's about educating people on what an abortion even is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And this idea that somehow abortion is used as strictly as birth control is just absurd, because there are so many married women who, for whatever reason, can't physically have another child. They can't afford it. They don't have the situation for it. It's just abortion is health care, and it is also something that should be decided between a woman and her doctor. If it's just the woman wants to bring anybody else in on the discussion, that's her decision, her right, but it shouldn't be the government. Abbie Perrault is one of the co-directors of this documentary. Again, you can see it Saturday the 26th, Sunday the 27th as part of the Chicago International Film Festival at AMC New City. Abbie, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Joan, thanks so much for the conversation.